Hey guys, in this video we're going to be checking out the new Arnold GPU Beta now that it's available for the public. We're going to be looking at how it performs. We're going to do some testing, check out the sampling, and we're going to compare it to Arnold on the CPU and to another GPU renderer, Redshift. And we're going to just look at the noise levels, time to first pixel. This isn't about the shading or any of that stuff. This is just kind of, let's see how the sampling works. This scene is a little indirect lighting, so it's got some GI and a little bit of direct lighting, so it isn't too complicated, but it is, you know, a little difficult to render since it's mostly indoors and using GI. And I think this will be a good kind of look into how the new beta is shaking out, and some of my critiques and what I think could be done to help improve it. And overall, I think it's a great start, but it's got a lot of potential, but a long way to go still, in my opinion. So yeah, we'll be looking at all this, and hopefully you guys can get a better idea of what's going on, and try this out yourself in some tests. So let's jump in. So here's our quick little test scene. We're using the F-Storm benchmark that I converted for Maya a long time ago. So we've got our render starting here in Arnold, and right now we're kind of just testing time to first pixel. I already hit the render button in IPR. I'm still waiting for it to update. And Arnold takes a little while for the first initialization to upload all the data into GPU. I don't know why it does this. Every time you start a new scene or you have more assets, it takes a while. So you got to just wait. But once it gets going, it updates relatively fast, but you need to wait. So if you start adding more objects, it's going to have to do this all over again. So yeah, we're still waiting. And there we go. We finally got about 50 something seconds in, first pixel. And so yeah, took about 56 seconds. So we're going to switch over and look at, it's just really noisy already. That's bad. But let's see how it compares to Redshift. So I'm using two 280 Ti's in this scene, just so you guys know. So we're gonna just hit IPR play, and boom, it's already there, and it's already cleaning up within the first, basically the moment I hit play. Generally speaking, this is I'm keeping the shaders as simple as possible so that we can actually properly compare this. The sunlight direction is the same, and this is slightly a difficult scene since it's mostly GI with a little bit of direct lighting. And as you can see, we already cleaned up a lot more, and we're only 30 seconds in. And so pretty much this type of a scene with mostly indirect lighting, and they both have 3 bounces of GI, the same amount of trace depths for refraction and diffuse bounces and stuff. And if we do these side by side, I mean, you can just see a huge difference. Now, moving on, we're going to do a 1080p test here. And I just have the AA to 30 in Arnold just so we could just render this for 2 minutes straight and just see what results we get. So, as some of you guys might know, Arnold does not, in GPU mode, does not support sampling at all. It just fires AA primary rays. So that's a little bit of a problem, and that's just due to the optics API that they're working with. It's kind of a limitation with that. And basically, the sampling system doesn't allow for secondary sampling, so GI, roughness, reflection, stuff like that. It kind of just fires path tracer mode, pure brute force random rays. And so they started adding those kinds of features, the adaptive sampling in the CPU mode, which is great because it saves a lot of ray firing, which saves you render time. And so right now we're going to just test this again just to see how clean this gets in 2 minutes. And you might have noticed that this time, the first time to pixel was a lot faster. And that's because I already had the scene loaded in. But the fact that I have to deal with that every time new geometry gets introduced into the scene is an issue. I don't want to just, doesn't matter if I add more geometry. I want the scene to just update pretty much the moment I click it as fast as possible. You know, like the CPU version, time to first pixel counts. And that is kind of annoying. And, you know, hopefully they can help out and speed that up and you know, in the future, and also get some sampling adjustments going on, because it desperately needs that. But this is a beta release, you know, it's still early, so there's hope that things will improve over time. We're going to let this run for 2 minutes just to see the result that we get. And again, this is a 1080p frame, and we're using a lot of GI, indirect lighting, so this is a technically, you know, a little troublesome for most render engines, and Arnold in particular has issues with interiors and GI. And let's check this out. You know, we got a really noisy result still for 2 minutes. If we come in here and just look at the shadows, the GI areas are very noisy. The direct lighting's okay, but even then that could be better. So let's switch on over to Redshift, and we're going to just start the IPR on this too and see, let it run for 2 minutes and see how it does. And it looks like 3 seconds, 4 seconds in, we already are just as clean as Arnold was in 2 minutes. And obviously, you know, Redshift's been around for a lot longer in terms of the GPU rendering game. It's been around since, at least publicly, 2014. So it's got a couple years ahead in terms of features and whatnot. But I mean, there's a big difference. I love Arnold. It's a great CPU engine. You know, it's got tons of awesome features that I wish Redshift had, like multi-scatter and random walk, but those things are coming to Redshift. So, you know, it's kind of what do you need for your particular needs. I think Arnold's awesome when you have a big CPU render farm in Studio or something. It just works. You know, you could fire whatever you want at it and it's going to render. And I think it's great that they're allowing you to have matching results between GPU and CPU for artists that need to look dev in the pipeline on GPU, and then everything gets sent to the farm. I think that will be great. But right now, if you're just an individual artist and you're just working on your own single workstation, or maybe you're a small studio, the GPU side needs work to compare it to other GPU engines for sure. But it's coming along, like I said. You know, it's got time. You know, but so do the other GPU engines. So we'll see how things shake out over the next few years. And I will say that, you know, Redshift still doesn't have RTX in this build. I'm using just plain regular Redshift with two 280 Ti's, while Arnold does use RTX. So this is 2 minutes of just progressive rendering, and if we compare the two right here, I mean, just huge difference in noise. A really big difference, actually, especially in the refraction. You can't even tell what's going on in the refraction in the Arnold version. We're missing some of that specular. And just look at the GI. So just for fun, we're going to try a Redshift bucket render in brute force. And so it's kind of hard to figure out how to get it to run to 2 minutes, because there is no time system when you're bucket rendering. Arnold on GPU does not have bucket rendering due to not having any sampling anyways, so you can't really get bucket rendering yet. And I wanted to just see what results we would get with this, just to kind of check out the noise and I tried to get the unified sampler to get as close as possible to 2 minutes It's a little over 2 minutes in this example, and I just did this to see, what we'd get using just brute force, and a couple samples here and there for the GI in particular, because that's what's mostly this scene's about. If we added all the textures and roughness and all that stuff on materials and lights, the results would kind of be skewed. It'd be harder to give you an accurate image since the shaders and stuff are so different between the two engines. But I could tell you that Arnold would be even slower just due to the fact that it can't sample specifically specular or GI or anything else. It just has to fire rays randomly. And yeah, so this is kind of just a test to see bucket mode and how it goes with the unified sampler. And then we'll also do a test just for fun, Irradiance Cache and Irradiance Point Cloud, just because those are bias techniques, but they particularly shine in scenes like this, where in interiors, archviz, stuff like that, where there's a lot of smooth or flat surfaces without a lot of per pixel changes or noise, as in textural or geometry changes. And so we'll see how that turns out after this test here, using just brute force mode. And like I said, I try to keep this example as simple as possible, just to best test what's going on. So this took a little over 2 minutes, 2 minutes and 18 seconds. We're going to zoom in here and just check out some of the noise. And again, guys, this is 1080p, so not too big. It's not 4K, but it's not, tiny. And yeah, again, 18 more seconds on Arnold's IPR would have not made much of a difference compared to what we've got on the right. It just can't clean up noise. It has difficulty with GI. It has difficulty with pretty much any kind of difficult noise scenarios. But it's great for look dev, the fast iterations, and then you could send this off to a render farm. And it's not like I'm using some old GPUs, I'm using dual 280 Ti's. I can't mix GPUs in Arnold with my 1080 Ti, so I can't activate all my GPUs because Arnold won't let you, it just crashes. So I'm only sticking to the dual 280 Ti's. So right now we switched over to Irradiance Point Cloud and Irradiance Cache. And so we're going to fire off another render and just see the results here. And this takes a couple seconds to generate the point cloud. And here we go, it's generating now the Irradiance Cache point cloud. And once this is done, it's just going to tear through this. And there we go. It's just going right through it. And this is going to be obviously super clean, just because it's using Irradiance Cache. So that took 44 seconds. And we zoom in, and it's, it's pretty clean in most spots. There's a couple areas that it could get a little cleaner, but overall, this is the cleanest in the shortest amount of time. But like I said, this GI engine works really well in these kind of situations. And if we compare the two again, yeah, that noise is just really bad. But like I said, they got tons of time and room for improvement, so hopefully, they get working on those things. For now, it's a beta, and it's coming along. And finally, we're going to just do a quick CPU comparison. And so I got some 40-core Dual Xeons that I got several years ago, actually. And, we're going to compare it with adaptive sampling and the sampling settings that we've got here. So this should, render pretty quickly, but at the same time not be too noisy. And we're going to let it rip and see what happens. So let's just let it render, and let's press play. So we're going to let this go for a little bit, and we're going to compare the result that we get from this to our 2-minute GPU IPR that was on my dual 280 Ti's, and see how the results compare. Now keep in mind my CPU isn't even that great by Threadripper 2 standards. You know, there's people out there that got the 64 core 2990 WX, and so that thing's going to be even faster. And so that's something that I've been hearing from a lot of people with that CPU setup. It's basically the CPU engine version, due to the sampling system and the adaptive sampling that they added not too long ago. It's basically just as fast or a little bit slower than if you're using top-of-the-line GPUs, which, you know, that should not be the case. And the noise sampling is a lot better on the CPU side because it's capable of sampling specific things that have issues. And so that can basically save you time, on top of having the adaptive sampling, which kind of figures out where the noise is and fires rays there where necessary. And so that's something else that's really important that's missing in Arnold on the GPU. That makes a really big difference on the CPU side of things. So we're almost done here, and we're about to get close to the 2-minute mark. So let's see if it goes over a little bit. And we're almost at 90%. We're at 2 minutes and 13 seconds. And we're done. So we'll just say 225 for our result. And if we come in here, you can tell that, you know, this is pretty clean relative to what we had before, at least on the GPU side of things. So let's just actually save this snapshot, and I'll really quickly do a 225 on the GPU just for comparison's sake. So let's store this snapshot. And let's move over to GPU mode. Let's switch over to GPU. We've got both of our GPUs here, our 280 Ti's active. And we're going to just crank up camera AA to 30 just so it just keeps going. And let's pause that actually because it started rendering. And adaptive sampling doesn't work, so there's no point in keeping that active. And yeah, let's see what we get in 2 minutes. So, and 25 seconds. Let's just round it up to 26. So here we go. And oops, actually I just realized I forgot to reset the clock. So let's pause this. Let's start that over again. So let's start. There we go. And we'll let this go for the 2 minutes and 26 seconds. And so, yeah, that's one of the concerns that I've been hearing from some people that have high-end CPUs, is that the sampling system on the CPU side is just really well implemented, and the adaptive system works well. And that was something that actually Arnold really needed in the past. It didn't have these things, and it had sampling, but it didn't have the adaptive sampling. And so it kind of just fired rays without taking into consideration the noise thresholds. So that's something that's been available in Redshift, V-Ray, other engines basically have had that. And so I know that Arnold's approach has always been kind of just brute force, and that's it. But lately they've kind of been adding some of these more biased techniques to shave off render time, which is great. I think there's nothing wrong with biased or unbiased. That's kind of just like a marketing term, really. Every engine is biased to a certain extent. All it means is that bias just means that you have more options to control these things, while unbiased, the user is not exposed to these controls. So in more biased engines, you might have more controls like adaptive sampling or different GI caching methods like the point cloud methods, or you'll have more cutoff thresholds, things like that. And those things tend to be able to make a difference, but they take tweaking or user knowledge. And so they have more options basically, but you kind of got to know what you're doing. While the more brute force methods are you just let it go and it does its thing, but you don't get that level of control, which can save you tons of time. It's not about quality, it's more about options to the end user. And so we went over a little bit, actually 1 second, but here's our result. And so if we compare the two, I mean, yeah, even my old CPUs that are, I think, almost 4 years old now, cleaned up quite a bit nicer in the same amount of time. And I'm using two 280 Ti's. These things are brand new. So the CPU to GPU performance, needs work basically. And the bottom line is, though, the culprit is that the Arnold GPU version lacks that level of sampling. So it has trouble sampling GI or specular, while the CPU version can kind of fire arrays where it needs them. So that's the quick little comparison we're doing here. And I'm going to open up all these images in Photoshop, and we're going to just kind of do a little side by side and see how they compare. And I'll give my final thoughts on everything. And I'm just talking about the sampling system here. I'm not going over shading or anything like that. That's I'd have to make more Arnold dedicated videos. Like I said, I've been using Arnold for a long time myself, and on the CPU, and I'm a big fan of it. I just feel like the GPU side still needs quite a bit more work, not including new features that are missing and stuff, because it doesn't do volumes and other things right now, but just the performance and the sampling system is what's really falling behind, even compared to itself on the CPU. So let's save this out and let's open up Photoshop right now. Alright, so here we got Photoshop open now, and we're going to just compare the two. So these are all of these are 1080p. So we're going to come in here and check out some of the noise sampling. This area in particular I think is a good example, since it's got a little dark areas and areas with balanced lighting and stuff, and a little bit of this direct illumination here. So this is Arnold on CPU, and this is Arnold on GPU. So if we switch between the two, you could tell that on the CPU, the sampling algorithm is just better. The adaptive sampling just works. Look at this. It's just cleaner. And then this noise is just kind of everywhere. It doesn't. It's like snow on a TV screen, an old CRT screen, where you could just see it. And if you look at the edges, they're just not cleaned up as well. While on the CPU, thanks to the adaptivity, And the sampling system, it knows kind of where to clean up edges for anti-aliasing and what to do a little better. And you know, these both took roughly the same time. Actually, the GPU took an extra second. And you know, that's a pretty good comparison. So right out of the gate, we could tell that the CPU side, even on the same time frame, in difficult situations like this with GI, the sampling system makes a big difference. And so I've seen a lot of people just do basic examples on a well-lit scene and some simple shaders, and you know, it's like, oh wow, this works great. But as soon as you start adding more shaders or difficult lighting like GI or indirect lighting like interiors, the GPU side starts to fall behind versus the CPU side, which tends to do a lot better when it comes to these type of difficult lighting and shading scenarios. So let's disable that. So we're going to now compare just the GPU to the GPU. So we're going to compare it right now to the Redshift progressive mode. And so this one I kept at 2 minutes. This isn't even the same speed as the Arnold version, which is 2 minutes and 20 something seconds. So not only is the lighting a little different because the sun is whiter, but the noise levels, if we come in here and compare the two, there's a huge difference. I mean, you could see all this noise here. It's hard to even make out the stovetop here. And so, you know, this kind of just, it's difficult to tell what's even happening here. And, you know, I could always increase the exposure to kind of see what's going on in there a little more. But, I mean, look at the noise. It's really bad. And if we just look at the Redshift version, the noise levels, even in progressive mode, which does not even take into account sampling, is just a lot better overall, even in the difficult to check areas. And if we compare now to brute force bucket mode, which did take the same amount of time, it took, well, a little bit less. It took about 2 minutes and 20 seconds. I mean, this is clean also, and the edges and stuff are defined in bucket mode using brute force. And if we actually compare it to the progressive, the results are a little bit better in some spots. Like right here, you got some reflection and stuff like that going on. And so now if we compare it obviously to Irradiance Cache, this is a technique that's just really good at these type of situations. So it's not really fair, since this doesn't exist in Arnold, since Arnold's only ray tracing and it's not able to do this. But, you know, I did it just for comparison's sake. And so this is just squeaky clean. And this only took 40 seconds. And that's just because Irradiance Cache and Irradiance Point Cloud, even though they're biased techniques, they're really good in certain situations. I mean, you don't really lose visual quality or fidelity. But, you know, they're not perfect for every scenario. You got to know what you're doing. So, but, you know, when you do use them correctly in certain situations, they're really fast and really clean. So, yeah, I mean, just compare the two. And this only took 44 seconds. So, again, let's check out some other areas real quick. Let's check out this sphere. And so we'll compare the CPU and the GPU Arnold again. So right now this is GPU Arnold, CPU Arnold. And yeah, you could tell these edges here are nicer. The specular is nicer. It's better defined down here, up here. The reflection, aliasing, sharper, nicer on the Arnold CPU version. So let's now check out progressive IPR, Redshift versus progressive GPU IPR. And again, this Redshift was 2 minutes, Arnold was 2 minutes and 27 seconds. So Arnold had a little more time. And yeah, just a big difference. The sphere, actually the IOR is a little different. I don't remember matching the IOR between Arnold and Redshift, so the IOR is different. You could tell because the fridge is bending differently. But that shouldn't really make a difference. We're not here checking the IOR. We're here to check the noise levels and the specular. And you could tell just how much cleaner the specular is down here. You could see the window reflections much nicer. I mean, they're there in the Arnold version. They're kind of just really noisy. And you can make out more of the details in the reflection. If you look at things back here, like the countertop and the chair legs in direct lighting, and you compare the two, even the direct lighting is noisier. And so if we come back here to this area, that's again not only being hit by GI. We compare the two. I mean, yeah, this is, so you can barely even tell there's something there. That's how much noise there is. And, you know, you can see it here. So if we compare it now to brute force bucket mode, again, sharper, cleaner. And finally, if we compare it to Irradiance Cache, the sharpest and the cleanest results right out of the gate in the least amount of time. So yeah, I think you know, like I said, this isn't really meant to be necessarily a criticism of Arnold GPU. I think, you know, it has a lot of potential, but right now in its current state, I think it's lacking, especially in the performance and sampling systems. It really needs to get some work done in there before they even try to move on to volumes or the other features that are missing. You know, right now it doesn't support volumes, it doesn't support trace sets, it doesn't support per light AOVs, it doesn't support actually quite a few AOVs, and among many other things. So right now, pretty much it's a great look dev tool. I think, you know, you can get lighting down and shading down, and it works with hair and stuff like that. But as soon as you start doing more complicated things, the CPU side starts gaining ground, and it just excels at things that it can't. It's just noisier. And once the complexity of the geometry, the lighting, and the shading scales up, you're better off with the CPU side. So right now, I think it's great for look deving assets or characters, stuff like that. But once you start putting them into a scene and things get more complicated and the lighting starts getting more complicated, it all kind of just can't handle it versus just throwing it onto the CPU and firing it off to the farm. So I don't know if that's Autodesk's and Solid Angle's intentions. I think it is. Personally, I think they've kind of mentioned several times that it's more of a look dev tool, not a final frame render, and that way you can get your look dev up to par before sending it off to the farm. And so for that aspect, I think it's great, and you know, there's plenty of room for improvement, and hopefully they iron out some of those things. But for now, I think the CPU side's still quite ahead, and other GPU engines have the edge. But you know, things can change, and hopefully things get updated. And like I said, this is more of a comparison in terms of sampling. I'm not comparing the shading or any of that other stuff. This is just, I wanted to see how the sampling and the speed to sampling performance ratio was. And yeah, so hopefully you guys kind of got an idea of things, you know, and if you feel like, you know, these things need improvement, let the Arnold guys know, you know, these are the things that you feel need to get worked on. And hopefully, you know, that over time they'll address these issues. So, but yeah, thanks again. And I know, you know, some of you guys might be wondering if I'll ever make anything for Arnold like I do for Redshift. in terms of tutorials and stuff like that. Honestly, there's so much content already out there for Arnold that I really never think that I would need to make any. Just because, yeah, there's a lot of other great Arnold users out there that already make tons of tutorials. There's just tons of content for it. While Redshift, there isn't as much, and especially when I first started, so I've kind of just stuck to that. That's not to say that I might not never make a Arnold, tutorial, but there's just already so much content out there. But yeah, so thanks again, guys, for all the support on Patreon and on YouTube. Hit the like and subscribe button if you guys like this stuff and want to see more tutorials. And feel free to, ask any questions in the comments. And thanks.